Welcome to IMTV. I'm Alan Keyes, and this is Let's Talk America. Today will be one in a continuing series of conversations that I am not sure will end anytime soon, because I expect that the focus of this program, and I would assume the focus of all Americans who still have a conscientious sense of their responsibility for the future of our country, our focus is going to be on discussing what is, I think, the greatest threat that our way of life has faced, not just in the course of my lifetime, but being somebody who's reasonably well read in American history, I think at any time. And you'll say, but Alan, what about the Civil War? Well, it was a civil war for sure, but I think Lincoln was right when he said that both sides prayed to the same God, which means that there was a common ground that upheld a standard that allowed them to argue with each other over questions of right and wrong with some sense that there was a common standard they were to be judged by. That's gone now. And I think it leads to a situation where it's life or death for the nation itself. I'll be talking about that with somebody I've followed for a long time, and he had a great piece the other day on this, a little 2-minute video that just summarized it really well. And that will be, I think, the core starting point of our discussion when we get back. I'm Alan Keyes. I just want to let you know that on a recurring basis every Tuesday, we're going to have a guest, Mike Adams, the Health Ranger. He's going to be joining us to talk about the whole array of challenges, both in terms of our health as a people and as individuals, and our health as a nation. We'll be looking at those things through the eyes of someone who has thought deeply about many things and who has many great ideas to share with me and with you and with everyone who tunes in to Let's Talk America on Tuesdays, when we meet with the Health Ranger to talk about how we sustain the health of our liberty. Welcome back. Well, my guest today is Tom Trento. He's the executive director of the United West. West in that larger sense of the term, which it's sort of not used, I think, a lot anymore, but which is critical to understanding, I believe, both who we are and where we are headed in terms of disaster for our country. But I saw a video that he had produced, and it was a pithy summary of where we are now. And it was one of those times when obviously someone had thought the situation through and he was anticipating what was going to be facing us in a way that you all will find familiar, because I do it from time to time and have done it over the years. And it kind of saddens me that I've come to the point where things that I thought were going to happen and it looked like they would inevitably happen if we didn't turn around on certain fundamental points, well, they are happening. And for the first time in my life, I think I've reached the definite conclusion that if we don't get a substantial number of Americans to wake up and understand the real nature of the threat, and we still don't find that in any of the mainstream media, with one or two possible exceptions, it's talked about in any way that really corresponds to the existential threat that as a people, as a nation, as a way of life, we are now facing. Tom came, I think, as close as anybody. And when I find that kind of a formulation, I always say to myself, we could have a great discussion. And that's what I thought. So I asked him to come on the program. And here he is. Tom, welcome to the show.
Ambassador Alan Keyes, very, very nice to be here. I have followed your career for many years, probably first met you early 80s. It was at an event, I think, with Ambassador Kirkpatrick. It was in D.C., Colorado, or someplace, and she brought her protege on the stage, and you wowed the audience. And I said, I like that guy. How many years ago was that? 30.
That would have been a long time. Well, are you sure we want to go through all of that? Because we'll be giving away our ancient status here.
Right. I followed your career. We have a lot of mutual friends, CNP people, and all of this. And you always impressed me as someone who understood the theological, the philosophical, the sociological, the psychological components of what brings a human being together and how human beings coalesce to form a team, a tribe, a village, a city, a nation, and the glue. And in our case, in this experiment, 244-year experiment, the glue being the Judeo-Christian moral value system that we all agreed to as articulated in the Constitution. But, Alan, as you well know, those times have changed, and I dare say I don't know in 128 days or so on November 4 whether or not if the other guys win, the Marxists, and that's what they are. They're Marxists. If they win, I don't know how we pull out of this. I don't know. It's going to be a different country.
Well, see, I think that it's quite remarkable to me to what extent they have now kind of ripped the mask off and are openly displaying to the American people their sympathy with everything that is not in consonance with our heritage as a people. And of course, they're going along, as are others who perhaps are ignorant or weak-minded depending on their age, or self-interested and greedy depending on their status in our society. There are others who are going along with it, but that's because they believe that if they can only get this whole system of self-government out of the way, where you still have to pretend you're paying attention to the common sense and goodwill of the people at large, if they can get it out of the way, then they can restore, as I think is really the goal, the age-old regime in which a little elite managed through various machinations of power to gain control over the vast majority of people in their town, tribe, village, state, community, nation, whatever it was. That has been the usual form of government. And maybe my first thought would start there. Because we heard about how people were abandoning, quote, American exceptionalism. Now, between you and me, I always thought that when people started talking about that, they never talked about what really made us exceptional. And I more and more think that's what it was, because they didn't want to remind Americans, by attacking it, of what really made us exceptional. But I think what really made us exceptional was that this is the only experiment, the only one that has ever occurred in the history of mankind, where people put their confidence and trust in the vast majority of common folks. And though they understood the dangers involved in that, I think they trusted it because they were dealing with people who had been steeped in the Bible, steeped in the understanding of morality and virtue that it conveys, and acknowledged the authority of God. We now have elites who have simply abandoned all of that. And some of them still claim that it's otherwise, but most have just ripped the mask off lately, and they are pursuing a course of action that means to eliminate that basis for our understanding of ourselves. Do you think that most Americans, first of all, realize that that's true, and second, understand the full implications, which is that they will no longer be anything but subjects, serfs, slaves in their own country?
No, I think Americans are coming around to that, but one of the unfortunate consequences of a stable republic. I mean, we look in the Middle East. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East and Israel leading national security tours. I'm there quite a bit in Europe and all of this. And you look, if you're a student of history, you see these various countries that have been unstable, destabilized, and the people are always in a constant state of preparedness, not knowing whether they're going to have food, not knowing whether stormtroopers are going to come through the door, not knowing whether or not animals are going to attack them, whatever it may be. They have a heightened concern and awareness of their governmental context. Well, when you have a stable government like we have enjoyed, then people put their guard down, that sort of existential guard, and they go play golf. They go on resorts. They buy an extra home and rent it out as an Airbnb. They produce and they generate wealth and enjoyment and artistic endeavors and all of this. And the Republican side of this experiment has been the leaders on the productivity side in culture, in society, but have lowered their guard against any sort of political or theological attack. Conversely, and you and I know very well from the riots of the 60s and the sexual generation and all of that, that all those guys became the professors, and the academy has been experiencing 30, 40 years of insane leftist teaching, and they have constantly been on the forefront of trying to throw over the stable Republican constitutional form of government. And now when it actually happened, Lenin said, Alan, he said there are years go by where nothing happens. And he said, then there are weeks go by where years happen. We're in Lenin's phase of weeks going by. We're literally years of turmoil and tumultual chaos have occurred on Twitter, in front of our eyes, on CNN, and we're all going, what's going on? So to answer your question, I think the average American is now waking up going, what the hell is happening? And it's going to take shows like this and individuals who understand this to lead the way to that November 3rd date, because this cultural revolution, which is exactly what it is, fueled by the Chinese, we've traced that, that's what we do at the United West. This cultural revolution will either be won or lost, and we have run the scenarios here at our organization. If Donald Trump loses, we can talk about the horrendous nightmare of a leftist government that may control Congress, both houses, and the administration. But even if he wins, Donald Trump, these guys are going to be even more insane. The urban areas are going to explode even more than they are now. It's going to be crazy. So we got to wake America up. That's what we've dedicated our lives to for, my life, 35 years of doing this stuff. But 133 days, 34 days remaining, that's going to be the key.
Well, one of the things I think you said that's very telling is that there is a decisive day coming. I think it's a decisive day that could be so decisive that it is the last reasonably authentic election that we shall ever have if the Democrats triumph. And I say that advisedly, and have not been willing to say it in the past, but I say it now because I think it's true. The second point you made, however, is also really critical, because people think that that's going to be, we achieve victory and that's the end of it. No, it's not. Because what I think has been signaled in the course of the last few months, in many ways, the COVID crisis being an important instrument in it, but other inklings came before and other inklings have come during and after. And that is that they want to foment violence and take this nation to civil war. And what they're hoping for is that it will be a war in which they can pit the cities they control and the populations they control in the cities against everybody else to rip the country apart. So that no matter what happens, it will result in the disintegration and dissolution of our Union and of the United States. Is that an exaggerated probability?
No, it's not exaggerated at all. And we'll point to another day of demarcation in the United States that has paved the way to the situation we're in right now. Yes, this cultural revolution has an expiration date, November 3rd. I just checked, 126 days from today. But back in the summer of 2012, and this is critically important and most of America missed it, at the Democrat convention in Charlotte, as they were establishing their platform, they had various planks they were arguing. And there were two planks where they were taking, the Democrats, the mayor of Los Angeles was moderating. There were two planks of the platform, policy platform, that were under consideration. One was whether or not the Democrat Party should support the nation of Israel, and the second was whether or not the Democrat Party should include the word God in their policies and their political platform. And the floor vote on both was no, twice. And the mayor was shocked, and you could see, we later learned Obama called them up and said, you better get them to vote yes on God or we're dead, right? As much as Obama, I believe, is an agnostic, he's that's another issue. But they had a third floor vote, and the floor vote was very clear. Nay, we don't want God in our platform. And the mayor, with his orders from Obama, said, oh, it passes. God stays in the platform. Well, you and I know very well as Christians that if you pull God out of this experiment, America, if you pull him out of public policy, you create a vacuum that will be filled by every diabolical element or ism or philosophy or individual that can possibly happen. That was 2012. It's only 8 years since then, and we're now reaping some of the seeds that were sown then with the whole Antifa movement and God being completely cast out of our culture. I got an email yesterday. The little town we're in Palm Beach. We're a stone's throw, a couple of miles from Mar-a-Lago, where the president lives. So we're in his district, and a little town right next door to his district, a town called Lake Worth. Friends of mine sent me the invocation 2 days ago at the city of Lake Worth. It's on the ocean, nice little resort town. And the vice mayor of the town of Lake Worth got up to do the invocation. About half the people walked out, the town commission. And you're wondering why they walk out. He made the invocation in the name of Satan, of Allah, of Thor, of Buddha, but expressly as an atheist in the name of Satan, the wise one. We have in America, in a normal American city, a vice mayor doing an invocation, praying to Satan. It looks funny on the surface, but from a cultural position, the culture is rotting when that type of thing occurs.
I guess, Tom, I've spent most of my public life, at least after I got out of the government per se and into the political arena, trying to deal with this very fact. Because I still think when one says that, there's often, in the minds of people listening and other folks, there's a disconnect. Because we often talk about the Constitution, right? But though I think a lot of people in their own minds, especially folks our age, understand what that includes, most Americans now don't. And so I have in my career explicitly referred people to the Declaration in order to get them to remember a simple, clear, plain logic. And that logic is stated in the Declaration. And you can see it from the first 2 or 3 paragraphs. There's a direct line between the Declaration of the Independence of the American colonists from Great Britain, the acknowledgement of God's authority, and the statement, which is fundamental to our form of government, that people all have in common, right, the creation by God, which endows them with a status before God of equal responsibility to his authority and for doing his will. And when they abide by that through the exercise of right, not determined by the whim of the Supreme Court or anybody else, but by the laws of nature and of nature's God, when they abide by an understanding of right and therefore exercise right according to God's endowment, government then is instituted not to give them stuff and do stuff for them or even to keep them safe. Government is instituted in order to represent their commitment to working together to provide security for that exercise of what is right, which then extends to rights and responsibilities. Start with responsibilities for family life, for communal life, for laws that are going to then help preserve those things. All of that's involved. But it's rooted from the very first in God. Now, the simple point is that if you take God out of that equation, and I'll ask this as a question to you, I'm not sure exactly how you see it, but the statement, all men are created equal, once God is taken out of the picture, I would argue that I could prove easily that it's a self-evident lie. There is no truth in it whatsoever. And that's because, as all regimes and all societies and every place, including our own, has illustrated time and time again, once you remove God's standard of right and wrong, the only standard that is left is the standard of decisive power. So that might makes right, the strong rules, and everybody else does exactly what they are forced to do by that standard. Am I right?
Yeah, two points. I'll flesh it out a little more, but I got to give you, when you get into the Declaration, I got to give you my favorite quote, and it goes something like this: that you were kind of referring to it, but I have a little better presentation. That all men and women have unalienable something or other, and you know that thing. You know that thing. You know that thing. You know. You know that thing, right? Unbelievable. This guy may be the president of the United States. Yeah.
Well, you do know why that happened, Tom. Tom, that happened because he can't. It was like he was choking on the name of God. He couldn't say it.
He couldn't say it.
He has been so deeply intimidated, acculturated, brainwashed, or convinced by the forces, anti-God forces in his party, that he was about to quote the Declaration accurate, realized what he was doing, figured that they would come for his head, and couldn't get it out. It just choked him up.
And this is a little aside, and I'll get back to the main point. As a professing, practicing Catholic, Joe Biden, who stands foursquare for women's rights at any point, you know, that disconnect, if you have any gray matter left, and it's questionable with him. He does have, I'm familiar with dementia. We're dealing with it in my family. And he is definitely on the spectrum. But that disconnect, to say, I stand with the church here, but yet over here, on the primary issue from God's point of view of what reality and human life is all about, I disagree with the church and God. You can't live a life of normality when you have those disconnects like that. My background, I got saved in college in New Jersey, and I was headed to the FBI. I did a degree in law enforcement, and once I got in this Bible study in the frat house, and after 3 months of arguing, lost the arguments and accepted Jesus Christ. I wanted to study this stuff. I went to Moody Bible Institute, did degree work there, and there I found out about Christian apologetics. I went to Denver Seminary, became an apologist, and that's what I've been all my life, formally debating all the people we're talking about now, all the leaders and the atheists and whatever you can imagine. And the basic presupposition in life is to have an absolute ethical foundation, to have an ethical construct that is coherent, it is non-contradictory, and it provides what's called existential viability. You need God. You pull God out of that, you jump to Fletcher's situation ethics. Well, you pull God out of the Declaration, you got situation ethics, and you're 100% right. You can justify anything you want.
Well, see, that I think is where we have come to. Because two things happen, and they don't realize it happens when you discard God. First, I think you have destroyed the foundation for common morality amongst all human beings. And second, though most people don't realize it because they've never thought about it deeply, you have destroyed the basis for science's authority. And you get into the situation Biden was describing in his problem when he said, basically, don't confuse me with the facts, what matters is the truth. When you're making that distinction, something's really wrong, and it has to do with your turning away from the only standard that can make sense of why it's wrong. We'll be right back. Are great when you're a multitasking person. You can listen to them around the house, when you're out in the car, when you take a walk. Now we have put our shows on to podcasts, and you can listen to Let's Talk America on podcasts. You can find them at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor FM, and other apps. And while you're there, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on our new episodes. Thanks for listening and supporting us. Together, we're changing the world.
More IMTV episodes? We are now streaming through Roku. Roku is a device that enables you to stream entertainment to your TV through your internet provider. The starting price is only $29, and you can purchase one either online or through your local electronics retailer. It's easy to use, and you won't have to worry about missing any more IMTV episodes. IMTV, changing the world.
Welcome back. Let me start out by reminding anybody who is watching us on YouTube or on our Facebook page that I do follow, with my little screen here, the comments that you may or may not be making on one of those platforms or the other. And occasionally my eye will catch something and I incorporate it into what we're saying, or a question will be asked, and I'll try to make sure we get around to answering it. So it's your way, for the time being, of participating in the discussion. And you can do so decisively, and sometimes it has happened that is the case. Because part of what we're trying to do on the show is not to say something new. See, everybody thinks you got to say something new and you get the new. That's all the garbage that has been sold to us over the decades that has gotten us to turn away from the simple fact that in order to build the house that stands, you got to have a solid foundation, and the foundation doesn't melt away from day to day. Otherwise, the house would collapse. And sadly, Tom, I think that may be exactly what is happening at the moment, because we've had decades in which people who call themselves leftists and all of this, they have been dissolving the foundations of our way of life. They have been applying various forms of acid. What they understood, though, Tom, that I think a lot of people who were openly in their language and even in their policy vocation, they said that they respected the founding, but they didn't think it through, and they have ceased now pretty much to make any argument that would appeal to the mind and common sense of the American people, that gets to the heart of what we were just talking about. So that we get all of these discussions of religious liberty and so forth and so on. And sometimes I like to remind people, I at least am not just fighting for religious liberty as if it was some kind of special interest, because I understand that once you have taken the concepts stated in the Declaration off the table, there is no basis for this regime. And what most people in America have to realize is that means you're not going to have a vote. You're not going to be in control anymore of what happens at any level in any way in this country. To be quite simple about it, and this may explain to some of you why I'm so adamant in trying to get people to see it and stop them from throwing it away, is for all the talk now of being anti-slavery and anti-racist and all of this stuff, don't believe a word of it, okay? The only racism that is truly out there right now is anti-human racism. The racism all these leftists and materialists and others who have nothing in their minds that actually acknowledges that there is worth in our common humanity determined by God Almighty. And that when that premise is removed, guess what? They get to determine everything, because they're the folks who are going to have the money, the intelligence, and the power without the need to consult you, your needs, or anything else. They will do to America what has been done in every regime. They'll just stomp out opposition, and the only thing they'll have to fear is one another. The day when somebody can mobilize a bigger cudgel than theirs to beat their brains out. But don't think that's going to make any difference in whether you're stooping in labor, whether you're being told to do what you got to do without remuneration if need be, put in some gulag somewhere. And every communist Marxist regime has been the same. So I sometimes think that we are talking about these things, Tom, in a way that ignores the simple truth. They act like they're against slavery, but in point of fact, all materialist ideologies imply the enslavement of the many by the few. Am I wrong?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. But the last sentence you just said, if you grabbed a sampling of the protesters at any of these cities who have college degrees, only college degree. Let's get advanced degrees. They got to have advanced degree. You grab a sampling, put them in a room, you make that statement, and you give them 4 hours to explain it. They could not explain what you just said.
Right.
They could explain it. We're in a post-Christian culture where once you pull God out, you pull the elements of logical thinking, you move to an emotional, subjective basis, which results in feelings being the focus. And when there's a confrontation, and we see this all over the place, YouTube or our own families, you have the sensitive leftist who's abandoned the rational cognitive capabilities of argumentation against a person like you or I. And as sensitive and gentle as we may be, we get 30 seconds before they're telling us to go F ourselves because they don't like that we haven't accepted them completely in this way. What you just described in your statement were these two books I'm holding right here, the Communist Manifesto and Rules for Radicals.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's being followed right now by the leftists. And Alan, when people don't think anymore, forget about the fact that we don't have a contract. We do not have a political contract where we've agreed that this document written 244 years ago is actually something that we'll sign in blood and we'll follow and we'll be united in. Once the academy in the 60s started attacking that, and then the unmitigated, uncontrolled, illegal immigration, taking third world people here, not even requiring any oath of allegiance to this contract, bringing them in and then teaching them that they can create their own world where they came from. Why the hell they leave it? They can create it here. Again, this stuff has consequences, and it's exploding in the street with the Mexican flag running down as they're burning, Gucci stores in New York. What is that all about?
Mm. Well, I think it's about people who have, on the one hand, it's a passionate question. And I don't think, by the way, the elites who are fomenting it, paying for it with their money, providing the organizational wherewithal. And I say that, by the way, Tom, because like you, I think it's a loss of common sense to see what's going on in various cities in this country, to see all the evidence that is being funded and orchestrated by forces behind the scenes that are then producing results, bought and paid for, in order to suggest that there's all this hatred against everything American. And the things that they've most attacked would include people that you would say, well, wait a minute, why are you wanting to tear down Thomas Jefferson's statue? Yeah, he owned slaves, but he was the guy who wrote slavery out of existence in moral terms in the language of the Declaration of Independence. That doesn't seem to make any sense. Why would you tear Abraham Lincoln down? You say you're against slavery. He is the guy who took the war, the Civil War, that some people wanted to make it all about wealth and economics and so forth and so on. And he made it clear, no, this is about slavery and about ridding this country of this moral evil that makes us a house divided that's going to destroy itself. And he did it. That means they're not really against slavery. And I think that's the first thing people need to realize. I'm not out there with all these Antifa, Black Lives Matter people, but because on one level, I think they are the tools of the re-enslavers. Why would I want to work with people, Tom, who aren't, sure, they're not saying, we're going to enslave Alan Keyes because he's a black man. No, they're just saying, we're going to enslave Alan Keyes because he's a human being. We have more power, we're going to have more power than he has, and we're going to enslave him, because that's what we're going to do with all human beings. That's what was the case throughout the world, and we're going back to it. And then they dare to call themselves progressives. It just makes my stomach turn. And I look at that, and I say to myself, how do we get folks to see what's really at issue? And that it's not this issue or that. The issue of systemic racism, for instance. That's an absurdity. But it's only an absurdity if you come from a background that says you don't hold generation after generation accountable for the sins of their past. You hold individuals accountable before God for what they do now. And that was an essential feature of the American way of life. Why do we want to discard this? Do many Americans realize that the very thing that offered people hope, that if they repented and turned their lives around and went out west, people were going to be willing to let them make a new start? That's the principle, that you don't hold people responsible for all the shackles of evil that have been fastened upon them, even by their own lives, much less the lives of their ancestors. Why are we letting them push us into abandoning this bedrock foundation of the hope that this nation offered to people of all varieties, that they could make a new start?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question. And, obviously we can point to the educational system. But again, Lenin's axiom, years go by where nothing happens and weeks go by where years happen. We're at 126 days. We're not going to be able to teach everyone intellectually the philosophical and historic context as to why we ought to function the way we do. We're in now a damage control mode. Here in Florida, we have 21 million people. Out of 9.5 million votes in 2016, Donald Trump won by a mere 112,000 votes, 112,000 on 9.5 million. Andrew Gillum, who almost became the governor in 2018, has since found his way into a rehab through homosexual drug use, crazy, very sad, and need to pray for him. And the guy's a Marxist. So, but as a Christian, I don't wish him the destruction of his life, only the destruction of his political philosophy. But here, he is mobilizing 1 million new Democrats to bring about this new majority that you may see. This author, Steve Phillips, who was one of the driving forces behind Obama, wrote a book, Brown is the New White. Amazing book. And the book simply says, demographically, progressive whites, which we'll call the loony left, progressive whites, joining with progressive people of color, form 51% demographically of the voting population. So it's a fact. Conversely, conservative whites, 46%, and 6% conservative people of color, 49. So the paradigm here in Florida, because the presidency goes through Florida, is voter turnout. There's more of us than them, is the argument. We've got to turn out. Now, sadly, this latest cultural revolution that we're witnessing could indeed turn people out. And I want to give you your viewers and listeners 3 dynamics to coalesce to get a good understanding of what's going on, but then that ought to motivate us to action to turn out evangelical Christians. We have between 3 and 5 million evangelicals in Florida that do not vote, Alan. They don't vote. But listen to this. We have the mobocracy. It's a good term, mobocracy. The mob forming their political movement on the street, and it's gaining momentum every day. Then we got Pelosi, who ought not even be there, joining and agreeing with the mobocracy. So now the traditional left joins with the progressive left, and they found a target in the one guy. Love him or hate him, I believe Donald Trump was raised up by God. He doesn't even totally understand this. To be the man of the moment, to try to preserve an opportunity in this union where we can come back to God, come back to reality. That's his first 4 years. Well, that's the good news. The bad news is he was the perfect target because he spoke about God. He spoke about Israel. He spoke about pro-life. He spoke about the things that from a supernatural point of view, spiritual, were blinding the eyes of those in darkness. So they had to attack him. So you got the momentum of the mobocracy with the justification of the leadership on the left and a target for Trump. And this whole tsunami is moving to 126 days. God help us. It's got to be a work of God. to turn out people.
I've got to tell you, though, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think to a certain degree you're right, except I think that's their narrative. I see a lot of facts that would suggest that that narrative can't work because they're exaggerating the extent to which they have captured all of these groups. That's step number one. That's particularly true in the black community. And though people may not have been paying attention during the course of the violence in the cities, I saw a lot of things, just ordinary folks, coming in front of the cameras, standing in stores that have been looted, owners of businesses that have been burned, black as me, right? And they were saying, these people aren't doing anything for me. They're destroying my livelihood. They're keeping me from feeding my babies. And then I also saw people who were looking at what's going on, and some of them even started to question why it is that in cities that have been dominated by Democrat mayors and Democrat prosecuting attorneys and Democrat others, you're suddenly having a defund the police movement because the police are out of control. Why didn't they control them? They're Democrats, right? Democrat governor and so forth and so on in Minnesota. Why didn't they control them? People are starting, I think, to see that all this drivel they talk is just that. And I think, though, a key question needs to be put. Two things. They've made a big deal about being anti-slavery, tearing down everything associated with nasty old slavery and racism and so forth and so on. What was the party that was committed in the election that put Abraham Lincoln, a Republican, in the White House? Which party was committed to helping with the spread of slavery and the maintenance of slavery? The Democrat Party.
Yeah, you know.
After the Civil War ended, which party made its peace with all the folks in the South who started to institute segregation and things like this in hopes of sort of keeping black folks from really achieving their full citizen status? The Democrat Party. I mean, I look at that and I say, well, if you're against racism and you're against slavery, how can you be in favor of the Democrat Party? I think the slogan ought to be, hate racism, dismantle the Democrat Party.
Amen. Because
they are the party of racism. And I would argue they still continue it. Because everything they say and do is based on the assumption that by and large, the folks, ordinary folks in the black community are helpless. They're incapable of taking care of themselves, and if government doesn't step in and do it for them, then they're going to be lost, and we, the benevolent, wonderful Democrats, are going to do it. That sounds to me as sick and as patronizing and as degrading as anything that was ever done in our history. Why are they getting away with it?
Your walk through history from the Civil War to the present on the Democrat Party. Our group here was thinking about this the other day, and we came up with this little little soundbite, tripart connection to help people understand it. The Democrats during the Civil War were for physical slavery. They wanted physically to own people and have them work on their plantations. Well, when they lost that battle, they put on their white hoods and their white coats, the Democrats, and now they created fearful slavery. They still wanted to enslave black people by fearfully going after them and causing them to be less human than they actually were. When that finally got defeated, the Democrat Party moved to political slavery. And right now, black people in the Democrat Party, and you're one of the advocates, and Larry Elders and our friend Alan West, and everyone is saying, you're slaves, political slaves to this party. They tell you you're a victim, then they throw you a few bones, you vote for them, they throw you a little more and keep you there. And what the heck is going on? So physical slavery, fearful slavery, and political slavery. But Alan, the last time I looked, you're black. Why do black people stay in the Democrat Party?
Well, I frankly have never been able to answer that question. I am black, but I'm not a Democrat. and I'm not a Democrat because Democrats have never stood by the premises that led to the overthrow of slavery. They don't stand by those premises. They go down this left-wing road that basically has everything decided by force, might, passion, mobs in the street, violence. All those things lead to slavery. It wasn't the color of skin that led to slavery. And when this whole America was founded in 1619, what a load of garbage. The simple fact is that slavery has existed throughout the history of mankind. And when people get up and say, well, black people are enslaved by white people, I'll remind them, I always remind them, the word slave, root Slav, was because people of dark skin who kept the slave markets in the Mediterranean basin during the era of Islamic domination, people of dark skin found that people of white skin made great slaves, especially to be warriors and so forth and so on. Those are the Slavs. And the word that then came into English was their constant reference to those people as the one they really wanted to go to the slave market to get. I'm going to get me some Slavs, right? Wow. And that became the word for slavery. The Native Americans, okay, one of the features of war as throughout the world, you win the battle, you enslave particularly the women and children of the loser. If you don't kill off all the men, then you enslave the ones of them that you think are going to be useful to you. Slavery has been a thing of humankind. When did it start to end? Not in 1619. It started to end the day a nation was founded, committed to the premise that all human beings are created, equal, and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. And that moment was the moment that set slavery on the path to extinction. And these guys want to put it back, want to overthrow that whole memory, erase it from the memory of mankind, tear down the statues, every vestige of the connection between that declaration and slavery they want to remove. Do you know why, Tom? I think they want to remove it so they can do it again. Only this time they're going to do it to every race and kind throughout the world. Are we that stupid that we're going to accept this? I don't get it. I think it's easy to see what they're up to. But I hear there are so many problems. Who wants to articulate that? And I mean, as clearly as I just said it, I think it needs to be articulated every day in every possible way to get people to recognize who these Democrats really are. They're the re-enslavers. That's who they are. And their target is not black folks, Native Americans, Chinese people, folks from India. No, they're not looking at just nations. They want to enslave every human being on earth.
It's a totalitarian approach. Yeah. Here's a problem I have, and folks like you and I and others that kind of get it are going to have to weigh in here, because there's only so many Twitter videos where a bunch of black kids beating up white kids. I mean, this stuff breaks my heart. Or the statues being torn down, or stores being burned, and Antifa white kids fighting with cops and standing in front of a black cop and just ridiculing a cop with words that, I grew up in a Sicilian, home in Newark, New Jersey. Tough men. Nobody ever used those words in the house in front of their mother anywhere. And now you got 19-year-old girls telling the cops to go F themselves and all of this. That's an indication of a cultural degradation. But here's my problem. The conservative people, the silent majority, and these are tough men. These are veterans. These are law enforcement people. These are athletes, tough women. They're getting pissed off, and I'm getting a lot of, when are we getting our guns, and when are we going to fight back? And I'm going, no, rule of law, no guns. Forget about that right now. 126 days, that's where the battle is, at the ballot box. We'll work after that. I'm getting concerned there's going to be a backlash, a conservative backlash, and then the Chinese and the Russians and all our enemies love seeing a fighting war going on in the streets of the United States.
I think that is part of their objective. We are running out of time. Can you believe the time went that quickly? But it really did. Will you come back? Because we're just getting into this, and I think we could converse for the rest of the afternoon and still be scratching the surface. I want to thank you for joining me, and especially invite you to come back, because what you were just talking about, I think, is where we have to go into it more deeply. Because in point of fact, we are in a situation where Americans have to remember that the source of our courage has always been our faith. That is the ultimate connection between God and the success of this country. And they're forcing us to lose sight of it, getting in our face so that we won't remember that we have the courage to fight back in the right way at the right time, precisely because we know God and are willing to live in such a way that He is willing to know us and back us up when need be. So Tom, come back. And all of you out there, now between the time you come back, I hope you'll do what I always ask folks to do, because this show isn't just about talking, it's about thinking. So think, ponder the things that we've said here, and then join us again at Let's Talk America.